Yep, and great. So welcome everyone to this evening's debate. We are debating This House would abolish Schols. We have debates like this every single Wednesday night during term. So please come around if you enjoy this evening, and hope and yeah, just to explain for any newcomers for this evening's meeting is split up into two parts because we're an old and historic society, get it, college historical society. But yeah, the first part is private business. So this is just a quick bit that we do at the beginning of all our meetings. It's going through basically the inner workings of the society. It's a bit interactive. Feel free to ask questions during it. And then we move on to public business, which is the actual debate, the reason why you guys came here. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Ronan Boyce to chair private business.
Thank you. I call the House to order, and I call upon the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last private business meeting.
The last private business meeting was held on the 24th of February 2021 with Tigran Simonian in the chair. There were no fines, no reports to be read, no motions on notice, and no motions not on notice.
Very good. Are there any objections? No, thanks be to God. Now, in that case, I shall sign the minutes. I think we'll just we'll all just pretend I've done that. And I'd like to cede the floor back to the auditor.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask a series of questions to the officers of the committee. So first and foremost, Madam Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are no fines.
Excellent. There are never any fines. On to Madam Librarian. Could you open question time?
Time for questions is now open.
Excellent. So this is actually an opportunity for anyone in the audience to ask a question of the committee or about the society, anything you'd like. It could be about the laws of the society, or it could be about how our day is going, whatever you'd like. Let's make this interactive. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to shoot it into the chat or use the Q&A function. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to type it out, I suppose. The suspense always kills me. Okay, excellent. I don't think there are any questions. So, Madam Librarian?
Time for questions is now closed.
Fabulous. On to Mr. Record Secretary. Are there any reports to be read?
There are no reports to be read.
Are there any motions on notice?
There are no motions on notice.
Are there any motions not on notice?
There are no motions not on notice.
Excellent. And then finally, back to Madam Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are still no fines.
Shocking. And without further ado, I'd like to cede the floor back to the chair.
Oh, yes, that's me again. Sorry, excuse me. Yes. I call the House adjourned.
Excellent. That's private business over and done with. Now we can move on to the actual main part of this evening, the debate. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Professor Patrick Gagan to chair public business.
I will take the chair. I call this House to order, and I call upon the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
Right. Schols. What is this strange, long-standing Trinity tradition all about? As I've never sat Schols and I don't really know a huge amount about it, I consider myself quite a neutral observer, but I do have some thoughts on it. Firstly, what's the story with the get-up of the fellas handing out the awards? They look a bit like something out of a 16th century Shakespeare play. You know, the ones where they get young fellas to wear dresses. Number two, did you know that it's traditional, apparently, for the scholars to go to the chapel afterwards to play a game of marbles against the fellows? What's that about? Even your granddad will say marbles are antiquated. How many students actually get the opportunity to have a few drinks in the Provost Garden? While they're kicking it up with their little thimbles of sherry, we're slumming it outside with our cans of Pratsky peeking in through the gates. Now, I would love to be a fly on the wall to see all those posh fellas pissed since noon, slurping their caviar with a dessert spoon and discussing how the political landscape has changed since their childhoods in the late Cretaceous period. To be fair though, while they like to keep to themselves at commons, you can still spot the younger scholars wandering around campus despite having finished their degrees, notable for their brogues, Trinity ties, and using those extra few years of Schols to put off sitting the bar so they can snort snuff in the GMB. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any objections to me signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Which does seem to be very similar to what we're going to be talking about in tonight's public business meeting. But in any case, there being no objections, I will duly sign in some virtual way. Perhaps when this is all over, we can all go in, all your guest chairs during the year can come in and sign the book. I would now like to call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the house.
Hello, I'm back again. So this evening, we're delighted to have two distinguished guests. In the chair this evening is Professor Patrick Gagan. Patrick Gagan is a professor of modern history at Trinity and a vice president of the Hist. He has served as senior lecturer and dean of undergraduate studies for Trinity College between 2011 and 2014, where he was involved in the development of the undergraduate curriculum and the admission process. Professor Gagan is an expert on Anglo-Irish relations in the late 18th and 19th centuries. And he's also the author of a book on the history of the College Historical Society, which was only published last year. So that's very exciting. Then on proposition this evening, we have Professor Sean Barrett. He previously worked as a senior lecturer in the Trinity Department of Economics and is a fellow of the college. He served as senator in the Dublin University constituency of the Shannon from 2011 to 2016, and he's also been pro-chancellor of Trinity College. He is also a vice president of the society, so it's delightful to have so many vice presidents in the Zoom call this evening. And I'll also just take this opportunity. Sorry, did I say proposition? I meant opposition. My apologies. He's in opposition this evening. And then finally, I'll just say the standing orders for this evening. Speeches will be 7 minutes in length for students and 10 minutes for our guest speakers. The first and last minute is protected, and it's protected from points of information or POIs. So points of information is basically an opportunity for an opposing speaker or anyone in the audience to ask a question of the speaker. So feel free to ask questions in the chat or through the Q&A function. Also, I should say that at the end of the Zoom meeting, or at the end of the debate, we'll have like a poll to see if the motion is carried. And I should also like to point your attention to the fact that we have orary turns. So these are basically a Google form where you can fill in and kind of rank the speakers and how well they spoke. This is really important to the society because at the end of the year, we actually reward the best speakers over the last session in our chamber debates. And the best speaker gets a monetary prize. So I really beg for you guys to fill out the form because it's really important to our speakers. And cool. I believe that's all the standing orders I have for this evening. So I'll cede the floor back to Professor Gagan.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Auditor. And we have a wonderful motion tonight that this House would abolish Schols. Absolute pleasure for me to be able to chair one of the meetings. And just before we begin, just to say what a brilliant job the Auditor and the committee are doing, and wonderful dealing with the Correspondence Secretary, Maggie, in the run-up to this debate. But you may not feel like it because you're having to do it all by Zoom, but you're performing a hugely important function by keeping the society going with weekly meetings in the middle of a pandemic. And I know it's not as much fun as everyone being in the GMB and being able to go out afterwards, but by keeping the spirit and the reality of the society alive, I think you are really serving a very important role and providing a lot of good nights for the members who are able to join in. You kindly mentioned my history of the Hist. It has the worst subtitle in history of all books ever written. Like, I'm absolutely ashamed. If this was a Scholl paper, I would fail it. It has, some other title, and then it's like the years 1770 to 2020. because it would have looked weird to go 1770 to 2019 when it actually ends. Oh yeah, and I thought, oh yeah, because nothing's going to happen in 2020, so I might as well just, you know, have it as that round number. And like the last chapter pretty much ends with, and of course the world was great and everything was great and blah 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 and many more years, and then bam, and like in 50 years time scholars are going to be picking up this book going, oh, I wonder what he had to say about 2020 when the pandemic hit. Oh, I'm sure that will feature in the final chapter. Oh, like disaster. Anyway, apologies. If I do have to run off, it's because I have two small children, and if there's any, so if I disappear, it's not out of some protest or something. But I think everything is under control. Okay, the motion, as I say, this House would abolish Schols, and I would now like to call on the first speaker to propose the motion, Bev Janaki.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so firstly, I would like to thank you guys for helping me achieve my lifelong dream of being an SU hack that speaks at a Hist debate that isn't about the SU. So I didn't have a lot of time to prepare this for reasons that I cannot acknowledge, but I have done some Googling and I've made some notes, and those things combined with the fact that I love to give my opinion on anything, I think this should be interesting. So should Schols be abolished? I think so, but that might just be because I'm bitter I didn't get it. I nearly did, but nearly never won the race. So yeah, no, I think that I have a unique perspective on this as somebody who sat Schols, somebody who's had a lot of casework this year with students who sat Schols and their experiences of doing it online. I'm also somebody who entered college through an access route, so I know the barriers that are in place, and I have a part-time job. So I'm going to draw on those things, but also some other disjointed points because I didn't know that I was speaking first. So I prepared some things that are slightly more obscure. But basically, I think that to place like such weight on one set of exams is a little bit bizarre. You know, the award that you get for achieving a first in one set of exams is really strange to me. I think we really need to analyze the equality of opportunity there. It's one set of exams in your second year, and we need to examine how that affects access students, students with disabilities, student parents. It's really bizarre to me. You know, if you're a student with a part-time job and you rely on that income to supplement your education, then you can't really risk giving it up for 6 months to study for Schols on the chance that you might get it. And for students who are in courses which have really heavy course loads, you know, workloads, regardless of whether or not you're doing Schols, it's simply not fair. There's also the mental health aspect of it, which, you know, I dealt with a lot with students this year. To anyone who doesn't know, I am the SU's deputy STEM convener. I'm also the biology convener. So I pretty much dealt directly with students who are sitting Schols this year. Casework, you know, they didn't know until days before how the exam was actually going to run. But there's a lot of anxiety. That also has a knock-on effect, because if you enter college and you're somebody who wants to pursue research, then if you don't get Schols, it has a negative impact. You have, you know, this sort of lower value of yourself and the degree that you're getting, and you think that you're not cut out for these things, which is really strange because Schols opens up this window of opportunity for postgraduate study with its financial rewards. And this is especially strange to me as a natural scientist. So if I had have got Schols, it would have been purely on the fact that I sat 3 papers and I wrote about things like environmental degradation and the history of plant life. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't examine my ability to actually go out and do an ecological survey and field work. And those are the things that postgraduate research rely on. Those are the skills that you need. And the fact that by being good at writing things down opens up that opportunity, I don't think it's, I don't know, I just don't think it's the best way of assessing those things. So yeah, I think when you consider the different groups that are affected by Schols and its rewards and how it disproportionately affects them, you could argue that we should reform it. in a way that, you know, those people can benefit from it. But because there's so many different groups, I can't really think of a way that we could reform it and it would be accessible for everyone. So what I would propose is that the college takes that, I think I read it was 1.5 million a year that that they spend on Schols, and redistribute that money elsewhere. Things like students with disabilities, there's already a reduced capacity for accommodation on campus, and they don't pay any less than an average student, which is bizarre. I think the money from Schols could easily go to housing those students. Similarly, it could be given to TAP, but not everybody who experiences financial strain comes through TAP. So it could be given to the senior tutor's office to fund specific bursaries for specific groups. I think it would serve a better purpose there. Similarly, there's like a lot of financial barriers in college already, like hidden costs and things like that. You know, there's really expensive textbooks. There's like health science students have to get vaccines and things like that. And it's really bizarre to me that college would like spend like 1.5 million euros a year to house people in Botany Bay and give them free meals in the dining hall, and then expect nursing students who are literally like working in hospitals in the middle of a pandemic to pay for their own vaccinations at the start of their degree. I just think that there's like a way better use for those. Someone said here in the chat, thank you. Yeah, I really do think that there's a way better way that college could use those funds. I think Schols is really archaic and outdated, and I get that college loves tradition, and I'm not in any way like diminishing people who have gotten Schols. I think it's a fantastic achievement. It's tough, but I just think that in courses where so much is already expected of you, that it shouldn't be the way that we sort of reward students for hard work, because there's students who work hard that don't get Schols. And then they do go on to have good careers. So it shouldn't really be the be all end all that people kind of treat it to be. And that is all that I'm going to say for now. 6.5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for opening the debate so well. I would now like to call on the first speaker for the opposition, Ronan Boyce.
Thank you very much. Good evening, fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Ronan Boyce is my name, as the chair mentioned, and I wholeheartedly oppose the motion before the House this evening. In relation to Schols, apart from geographical location and perhaps the college's name, the Foundation Scholarship is one of the few constants in the story of Trinity since 1592. So the tradition of the scholarship is a precious gift from history we are endowed with today. And to strike completely, not just to reform, but to strike completely, to abolish from the statutes such a practice, I believe would be to squander something precious which distinguishes this university from all the others. It really isn't anything quite like Schols in UCD or UL, whatever. Now, no scholar with any degree of modesty would try to justify why they personally were in receipt of the scholars' emoluments. At a purely individual level, the cutoff between people who got it and people who didn't is so random that it is almost cruel. But it's only when we examine the institution of Schols as a whole that we can begin to justify its continued existence. I think, although it's far from totally equitable, I don't think anyone would try and claim that. It rewards not necessarily the most conventionally bright students or the ones that were on the ball in their course and doing the term exams in first and second year, but the ones that took initiative and to demonstrate their curiosity in the material, the wider material of their subject, not just the content of their course. They are the most likely to get Schols should they take the exams. And as well as that, the principal practical purpose of Schols these days, as the previous speaker alluded to, is to encourage those particular students that college thinks have an exceptional curiosity, not a natural, not just exceptionally intelligent, but have a particular curiosity for the subject, to stay, particularly in Trinity, and to participate in research and to contribute to research here particularly, and to enrich the overall academic life of college, which benefits us all in the long run. But moreover, life as a scholar, and those the emoluments package for scholars, it's not just a random collection of things. Life as a scholar, as the college has designed it, deliberately fosters cooperation, but prompts the sharing of ideas between scholars of different disciplines. Right? They eat meals together after all, and they live together, very famously. Given that these are the people that are most likely to stay in academia, and after graduation, after they finish their undergraduate degree, is it not best for the good of the research they will all do, which we could all benefit from, remember, that they are exposed to the greatest number of perspectives, the greatest number of methodologies, and the greatest number of approaches to any problem or particular research question they may face. Now, of course, a lot of us have heard very cynical anecdotes about people who they chanced their way through the Schols exams and they did it for the vanity, and they actually didn't really need it, and it was squandered on them, so to speak. But those are a handful of people, and that is the price to pay for having an award which can be life-changing for so many more people. And I would regard that as always a price worth paying. Moreover, I would regard it as incumbent upon the proposition. No, thank you. I'm afraid I don't have time for points of information. Sorry. I would regard it as incumbent on the proposition to establish for the House why there should be no foundation scholarship at all, not just why the mode of assessment or the profile of the emoluments should perhaps be changed. After all, the foundation scholarship, although we say it dates back to 1592, has had many reincarnations since its nascence then. It was originally a general exam that prospective students took before they entered college, and it has evolved to become an exam focused on one's own discipline taken whilst you're an undergraduate. And it's evolved to include Catholic people, which it didn't originally do. People don't think about that now. It evolved to include women, rightly so, and it evolved to include students that didn't study what were regarded as the traditional subjects taught in college. Originally, it was limited to only a handful of subjects. From this, it would seem that apparent that not only is the nature of the scholarship evolving over time, but that college is becoming more equitable in its award of the scholarship over time. As college welcomes more and more people from different backgrounds to participate in college life, and rightly so, so too has the scholarship been expanded to incorporate more and more of the Trinity community. Now, it is still far from totally equitable, certainly, but it would be my hope, as I would assume will be the hope of a great many other people on the call this evening, that the award would evolve even more through time to make it more inclusive. But sadly, this will not be possible if it is abolished in its entirety. In spite of all this change, though, the spirit of the award has remained the same, and a value to the award has accrued over time, which could not be achieved all at once, were a new undergraduate academic award were to be created by the force of fiat of the College Board. Getting Schols isn't just a gift from the present day. It attaches you to all those in the past who were so lucky to receive the award and have used that as their springboard to make a mark on Trinity, and in some cases to make a mark on the wider world. I could say in conclusion, Schols is rare among the good things in life Dublin has to offer. You can't get in because of who your dad is, you can't, or who you know, or where you went to school. You can't get in by rote learning material somebody else gave you. You can't buy your way in. You have to, oh, thank you, I'm just concluding. You have to love what you do in college and express it as best you can to give yourself the best chance of getting in. As this is the principal decision rule the college used when they decide to elect some students as scholars every Trinity Monday in every year. It is why this is a unique and humbling honor to bestow on anyone, and one which would be difficult to replicate by some other formula. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, a very good opening statements for the opposition. I would now like to call on the second speaker for the proposition, Jack Williams.
Can you hear me? Just to make sure. Cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk to you about 4 things in this speech. The first is going to be why Schols is fundamentally, structurally never going to reform. Secondly, the resource trade-off that often exists. Thirdly, why it is structurally unfair, not just a little bit, but entirely. And fourthly, why even if you don't think it's structurally unfair, why it screws up people's mental health even more so than society already does. In October 2020, the senior lecturer tabled a reform to the Schols examination, which was to include coursework to make Schols more equitable and more fair. The response from the head of the scholars was to say that we ought to think about it with caution and not to think about it really at all. There's been no discussion since October about this reform. The implicit thing here to note is that they were trying to make it more fair and more equitable. In January 2021, the scholars put forward and were in support of limiting the amount of people who could access Schols, not just because it was something that is good or something that made people's lives better, because it represented privilege and prestige and chose to lock people out. Note that those things, crucially, are things like the fact that they are unwilling to reform it. I think capping the number of people indicates that reform is slow and that reform plays out. The first thing to do, I think it's just things. No, well, not the scholars supported that. Sorry, that was a paraphrase, and I didn't mean that. I meant at the committee meeting, the people who like hacks, a very old person within it, specifically not the current scholars. Sorry, that was the distinction I meant to make. No, I wasn't attacking individual scholars there, but just the response at that committee meeting, and which is true. Additionally, why do they not want to reform it? Look, I think it is true. I think Ronan is right. You get things like free food, like education. You do get the prestige of it. And I think that just means that means there is a cognitive dissonance there. That is to say, how often rich people do not want to raise taxes because their lives are better because of it. Simply because Ronan says that it's life-changing, but there's so many ways in which you can make other people's lives better, specifically with those resources. And I think that just means that those individuals do not want to make their lives worse. And look, I don't blame you. Like in that position, you probably do not want to have to give up the benefit you get there. But let's just think about that resource trade-off. That's 300 more people who get to go to college. That is, additionally, you can do things if they care about academia and improving the college life. It is things like funding academic research over the summer, or allowing people to appropriately do that and apply for those things when most people have some degree of free time. Doing the idea exchange that Ronan specifically says, but at the specific harm of locking people out of it. Like, it's not just mutually exclusive that you can assert that one thing has a unique benefit and never explore the alternatives. And I think that is the burden of the opposition to defend that, because that is unfortunately why Schols is so structurally uninformed. And I think that just means that people can explore ideas either way. But even if you put none of the funding there, the type of people who get Schols, who go for Schols, the type of people, as Ronan says, probably do stay in academia, but they often stay in the same academic circles. They still go to the same meetings. They still sign up for the same things that progress academia and often exchange ideas anyway. I don't understand why them having dinner in the common hall necessarily fulfills that. I don't think that necessarily proves anything beyond they get to eat dinner together. I'm sure you can afford some food with your potential academic friends. Look, the third thing that I want to talk to you about, why it is structurally unfair, because it's not just slightly unfair. The very iteration and the premise in which Schols is built on is, firstly, you study on top of your coursework, and I think as the first proposition speaker pointed out, that it's often intense coursework that is often overwhelming in the first place, especially in the context of TEP that demands examination halfway through the year. The second thing is that people do often have to work, and what that often means, crucially, because it is often over Christmas, because that is when the free time that you can do the most amount of work occurs, on top of the fact that you often have to work during that semester, means that individuals who have to work during college are often discriminated against. Ronan says the brightest students get Schols. I just think that is, unfortunately, to be crass and to be blunt, is bullshit. You can be the brightest student and not have the time to do as much studying because of the fact you are locked out. You can be the brightest student and maybe you didn't go to Trinity. Like, isn't the fact that you just expose more ideas than Trinity, if you do use those resources to expand TAP so individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds can get involved, that expands more ideas and allows more people into the college. But the third thing to note is, like, Annie, I know plenty of scholars. Ronan, I know you as well, and I quite like you. But like, most of the scholars I know literally just got notes from their friends and regurgitated them, already had most of the work done for them. The only thing they had to do was build upon that slightly. And I think it just shows that there's a systematic disadvantage if you don't make those friends, or you don't know those people, or you didn't go to school with them, that often puts you on the back foot. The fourth thing is that people often do aim towards this if you do go from a private school, simply for the fact that you know what Schols is. Most people often aren't aware of Schols till the start of second year. So the fact they're already on the back foot in terms of studying for it. I know people in first year who started studying for Schols during the summer of first year, which meant they had an extra 4 months to study behind those individuals who only came aware of it later on, or often just do not know how to efficaciously study and find out those resources. And I think that just means that you do have all of the privilege that Ronan says, that means that you often do get Schols. Even if the fact that I'm not saying that no person with all those barriers can't get it, but increasingly is often a very, very, very select few. And those people who do get it, you can benefit those people in other ways and benefit similar people like them systematically. The fourth thing is, even if you don't buy all of that, the stress alone, months of studying. Let's say you don't have all those notes, months of studying. You often have to spend a crap load of time. You have to sacrifice things like seeing your friends and making meaningful connections, ignoring the college experience and getting to know people and making those friends that mean that when you do leave college or do want to expand ideas, that becomes a trade-off. And I think it's just the narrative that Schols does equal intelligence. It's the fact that it says that it is prestige. It is the pinnacle of academia, at least until you finish your undergraduate degree. And there's very other limited ways in which you can express that within the college. And I think that just means that when people finish on 69.25 or 69 or 68, feel like shit because they didn't get it, I think it shows that it is incredibly arbitrary and, to be honest, just frankly crass that those individuals who are often just equally as smart and maybe wrote a slightly different paragraph that bite into the biases of the lecturer, who had their own ideological preference on what that academia should be perceived as, are discriminated against. I think the applying for things that funds academia means that it's more equal and you can access those very things. And I just think that that means that those individuals can love their course better, can explore it. And I think you get all of the benefits of academia without sacrificing people as pawns to instrumentalize them in a game of academics with no guaranteed benefit outcome, just because it makes you feel good and because it was tradition.
Thank you very much. Very powerful speech there by Mr. Jack Williams. We will now call on one of our guest speakers. He is a former distinguished academic in Trinity, also one of our former very distinguished senators. Indeed, a former very distinguished pro-chancellor. So with 3 levels of distinction, I think we're all looking forward to hearing from Professor Sean Barrett.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society and Madam Auditor. I became acquainted with the scholars on Trinity Monday because we all assemble in Front Square, and in the great Trinity Monday poem by Richardson, on this proud day in the month of May 20 years ago, it was just the same. The provost came and flanked by the crowd, flanked by the board, and the vast crowd roared. The list was read, and away I sped to buy and tan my scholar's gown, and I donned my cap with its velvet nap. I learnt the grace and the hopeful case that sooner or later I'd be made waiter. The day seemed so splendid, I even attended the discourse on skeleton, not a theme to be dwelt on. And in the hall I dined, and in the hall I wined. And the day seemed always pure joy without alloy, save for the jar for my first cigar. The following day, we made our way to number 1, where we'd an oath to swear, and a gallant band held Mahaffy's hand. And the excitement of that, he says at the end, if mine be the span allotted to man, I may have twice 20 years to go, but such a Trinity Monday there will never be that will seem so splendid as that one then did 20 years ago. So you may guess from that that my notes are in college, and I'm way outside the 5K limit. But that's what was my introduction. I think it's a happy college occasion. People go across then to college chapel, it's usually visiting distinguished preacher, and then to the GNB for the discourse. So I think it is a splendid occasion. Of course, I'll come to some of the points that have been made about how could it be improved. On its cost, I looked up Section 9 of Consolidated Accounts. About 30 people get this each year, so that gives you 150. Out of a student population of 18,000, it's 0.8%, so it's not the great burden that you might think. The budget for it is in Section 9 of the Consolidated Statement. The cost is 653,000 for both fellows and scholars. Scholars are not listed separately. That is 0.17% of the operating expenses of college of 383 million. Looking through the list, there is advertising and PR, 2.3 million. That's about 3.5 times the cost of the fellows and the scholars. Hospitality, that somebody disproved of before, is about twice. There's a strange section, other expenses, 6.6 million. I think that should be sorted out. It's 10 times the cost of the fellows and scholars combined. There was certainly, towards the end of my time, and I'm still very much involved and I enjoy college so much, there was an anti-scholar kind of movement, and some of it's been covered. Only sitting it once, I couldn't see what the point of that, but some subjects, perhaps Professor Honorary Rivin, our distinguished historian, would say sociology would be involved. She had a suspicion of sociology. There were people who were against people sitting Scholl in sophistry years. Why? I couldn't figure out. There was also no exemptions. Last year, the Scholl exam, which is, people have said on both sides of the argument, it's very hard to get. It's 0.8% of all students were deemed not to be able to proceed to junior sophistry, which about 85–90% of people do. So they had to leave on Trinity Monday early to do an exam at 9 o'clock the following morning. No preparations. About 4 years ago, I saw people at 29 on the morning that the Scholl exams began, queuing in Front Square because nobody bothered to put out enough desks in the examination hall for it to happen. I'm against quotas. I think we cannot predict in advance, who's going to get Scholl and in what department. It's a bit like the Department of Education and its algorithms, and I think that shouldn't be allowed to happen. And the excuse for the quotas was we were suffering from grade inflation in college. That's obviously not true. If you take the high points at entry into Trinity and contrast that with the number of first-class degrees we get compared to other institutions, there is not grade inflation. So I think there are improvements needed, but there have always been a substantial number of people on the staff side who are opposed to scholarship, and I think they've been influential in the wrong way, and that's actually some of the reforms that I've just mentioned. What do scholars do? They take extra time to take an examination voluntarily. They have exceptional ability, commitment. They enliven and enlighten our society. One of my student scholars, Morgan Kelly, was the first person to draw attention to the imminent Irish banking collapse, which cost the country 64 billion, including a huge amount of money taken out of education. He wrote it up in the Irish Times. Another scholar, Philip Lane, was the first governor of the central bank to sort out the banking mess. And we've others in MIT and Harvard and Yale and Oxford. That provides you with a network for graduate students and other people from college. So it's extremely valuable. But most valuable is the knowledge. Because Morgan Kelly wrote about how banks become zombie banks, and he coined that phrase, we all now know that. Knowledge is not a private good. It serves everybody to have those who are engaged in extra research, extra thinking, to spread that knowledge around. So hopefully we won't have banks wrecking the country another time, and senior civil servants obviously not qualified for the jobs that we're supposed to be doing in the lead up to the banking crisis. So it benefits everybody to have scholars producing work which enriches the entire society. And we do that regularly in all sorts of fields. We don't choose 5 people, 8 people randomly in Front Square and say, go up and race against somebody else in Ireland Bridge for the boat club. 15 random people go down to College Park, take on UCD in the colours match. Pep Guardiola is better than somebody in Grimsby or some other place. So the preparation, the knowledge, the commitment in every field of activity, whether it's debating in the Hist, we don't just choose people at random. People work to get chosen to compete for us in the Irish Times, and I wish them well. We want the same standards in choral. We want the same standards in College Chapel. So study, sport, music, people who put in extra endeavour and who don't cost the college the large amount of money that's assumed, even though the system obviously does need to be reformed. They serve our society. They serve our country. They enrich our lives. They improve our learning. They improve our debate, sport, music, and all the 60 plus departments we have in college bring forward a new generation of scholars every year. And I think that is for 0.17% of college budget, that is fantastic value. I could think of lots of other things I would cut back before I would touch Scholl. So I ask you to oppose the motion on that scholarship has served our college well. As somebody said earlier, they don't have it in other places, neither do they have fellowship. That seems to attract a particular ire of the Higher Education Authority and the people in the new government department for higher education. But with all of it and all the things we do, we are by far the highest ranked Irish university in the world rankings. And sometimes the things we do uniquely are the things that got us there. I'm very proud of that. And of all the things, the clubs, societies, music, the debates that we have in college, they enrich our society. And the fellows and the scholars are an innate part of that. And I don't think it's a particularly large part of the budget, and it brings us massive benefits to us as a society, to us in the TCD community, and to the world of learning. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to oppose the motion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And just so there is no appearance of the chair being biased in giving a glowing introduction to a speaker, when I introduce the next speaker, the final speaker for the proposition, just to say that she appears very prominently in the history of the Hist. She is one of our finest former auditors, one of our most distinguished former auditors, had an absolutely superb time in office and contributed so much to the development of the society. So would you please welcome Ursula Quill.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that kind introduction. Rachtra a chairlach a chuine úsle common starúil an chaláiste agus a chóirde galéir. I'm very happy to propose this motion, and I'd like to commend the auditor and the correspondence secretary for the debate. I think it's a really excellent debate. And as the final proposition speaker, I'd like to, I suppose, synthesize a number of the themes that we're seeing on both sides. And it's a real pleasure to follow Professor Barrett. Of course, I worked with Sean for many years in the Shannon, and we worked with college on a number of things, you know, and I think it's important to note that there are so many of the traditions in college that I think can seem to be you know, exclusive, but really are for all the students in college. And I suppose that's what I'd like to be kind of the theme coming out of this, that how can we make so many of the wonderful things about college available to whoever wants to be a part of those. So that's as a very kind of unradical final proposition speaker. But I was thinking about how I would propose this debate tonight, and I was recalling my own Trinity Monday 11 years ago. And I suppose I was thinking, well, is it my Trinity Monday? Because I was very kindly given the heads up by the Irish department that I had not got Schols. But I went along because my three best friends at the time were very deserving scholars. So I wanted to go along to support them, and they did get Scholl. And I was really delighted for them. But I think I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't bittersweet, because, I could see, and then there were others as well who were disappointed that day. That, of course, they were going to be kind of entering into this somewhat mysterious world of commons and of shared accommodation and a kind of a college community that Ronan described so beautifully earlier. But I suppose with the passage of time, I suppose I looking back at it, I don't want to look back with bitterness or resentment, because I suppose I've been presented with many other opportunities in the meantime. And as a returning student now, as a postgraduate and PhD student at Trinity, and as somebody who is benefiting from another kind of scholarship and award, I suppose I want to look back and see, well, what were the benefits of, or the drawbacks of Scholl and of that institution, both for the scholars I knew, but also for other people who really all, I suppose, the type of scholarship that has been described by the opposition, I think is something that most of us here value, that type of, the objectives of scholarship, of the scholarship institution, and what it aims to foster in the university. Because I was interested that Ronan said that it's incumbent on the opposition to establish why there's no need for foundation scholarship at all. And I suppose I think the flaw in that is that he said that I suppose the constant in the story of Trinity is this institution of scholarship. And that's very true. You look at the statutes of the college and you see that, the college is a corporation consisting of the provost, the fellows and the scholars. And there's something very, very wonderful and quaint in that college is made up at its very core and its very foundation of not just of the provost, and of course we have that election as well, from the very top right down to the students, and that it's recognized from the very start that we have the students as well. And I suppose one thing that and it's some other things that I was going to say, but that got me thinking about how, in many ways, with the passage of time and with how the makeup of college and with the makeup of the student population has changed so fundamentally since 1592, and we have such a growing student population, and that's another conversation. But there is a fundamental conversation to be had about how do you value ratio-wise, student excellence and scholarship when you have such a large student population, so many disciplines. So the remit of foundation scholarship in 1592 can't be the same when the ratio is so different to today. So that's I think the real challenge, to even I think to be fair to the opposition's viewpoint. I think when we have huge problems around student ratios, and I hope that whoever is the next provost will really address that issue, because you have that much abused term of the student experience. What does that mean when you have such large classrooms where people aren't getting the chance to really flourish as students? Because I suppose the two things that I wanted to address in terms of the harms to both scholars and then to other students. So looking first at scholars, what I saw, and this is anecdotally, but I suppose a lot of this is anecdotally, what I saw was that a lot of scholars, it created a huge amount of perverse incentives for them, particularly in their final year in college, where they were faced with whether or not they had to stay on in Trinity to use their Schols. Kind of like, the leaving cert. If you've got 600 points, do you use your points? And I think that gets to the heart of, I suppose, how it's flawed, how the Schols is designed, because you're at a very early stage in someone's undergraduate studies, middle of second year. You're presenting them with a package, a really attractive package that places a huge amount of pressure on them, probably on their families as well. That has, I suppose, huge implications for their postgraduate career, at a stage when a lot of people from experience maybe haven't fully committed to their discipline, and maybe haven't fully committed to whether or not they want to stay in academia. So there was a time where 5 years from second year would essentially give you a PhD, if you're very kind of efficient about it and you just weren't looking elsewhere. But I mean, that's not the case now. And I suppose looking at it now from the starting a PhD now and seeing all of the huge pressures on the postgraduate community, I think it's somewhat naive to present second years with something that doesn't bear a huge amount of relation to what the postgraduate scholarship, all of the kind of scholarships that they're presented with will look like. Now, I think I'm running close to time, so I suppose then just to look at the kind of, so I suppose finally, I just want to look at the kind of the objectives. I think the objectives of scholarship and I think it's important if the system, and I think the system needs to be fundamentally reformed. And I think there's something fundamentally, I suppose, wrong with a system that, I suppose it says, if you look at the kind of, its objectives in the college calendar, the objective is to identify students at a level of evaluation appropriate to senior freshman year who can consistently demonstrate exceptional knowledge and understanding of their subjects, and the skills that are involved there. They're all very, very worthy objectives. But I suppose college really needs to ask whether or not giving this 5-year package is actually identifying those students, and whether or not identifying them in a long-term way for a 5-year period, rather than perhaps, students who do very well in their degree, whether or not they'd be incentivized to stay on further for postgraduate study. Or, for instance, you could have exams at the end of each year to identify who were the top students in each year who want to participate more fully in the, I suppose, the scholarship community. And I suppose just finally, I would say that I think scholars at the moment, yes, there's clearly, I think I've seen scholars who gained huge value from the kind of the community and the friendships they gained from the scholarship community and from Commons. But there isn't any incentive for them to, I suppose, really contribute to scholarship within the college and to share that with the wider student community as well. So for those reasons, that I think it actually harms a lot of scholars themselves, but also other students who would otherwise want to participate, but feel no incentive to really participate within the scholarship community within Trinity. And most fundamentally, why I think it actually doesn't reflect the student population in Trinity today. It might have reflected it 100 years ago, and certainly in 1592. I think the Schols, the institution of Schols, needs to be abolished. So,
thank you very much. And now, to conclude the formal part of the debate on the side of the opposition, I call on Ben Mahan.
Hi everyone, can you hear me clearly? Cool. If my internet cuts out, it's quite poor, so just let me know. I'm on my mobile data. Cool. So, right, I'll start then. So, right, hi everyone, Schols. So about like maybe 3-4 months, I'm just going to talk about my own experience. I'm pretty sure like me and my peers' experience from the group that did it. So about like 3-4 months of fervent study, like sequestering yourself away in Usher 4, still can't walk past that like back row of seats without getting like aggressive flashbacks to like some of the books I read at the time. Like, people ask you, are you doing Schols? And you're going, oh yeah, I am, but I don't like, I've no hope of it, but in your head you're going, maybe I do, I'd love to get it kind of thing. And then at the end of that, get really excited. And then you're sitting at home after 4 really hard exams, about 3 months later, watching Paddy P on a screen because the pandemic has just hit, getting really excited, staring into his eyes. And then he says, doesn't say your name, just doesn't say it. Skips over you entirely, right? And I'm not bitter at all. Like Bev, I'm not bitter at all, as you could probably tell by the tone of my voice. But I'm on the wrong side of the house, really, right? Because I was weighing it up, and I think I would potentially, I was on the fence. But then the more I thought about it, the more I think we shouldn't get rid of Schols, right? Because there's a few reasons for this, right? But the reasons I'm going to go through are reasons why we shouldn't get rid of scholars for people who aren't scholars, because I'm not a scholar, right? And I think that like everyone has said, it's been said a lot in this debate, scholars are like a tiny minority of the college population. So to be honest, I don't really care about that much of a tiny minority of the college population in the same way that I care about the rest. So I'm only going to majorly talk about the experience of people who don't get scholars, right? Because this is the experience of the majority of people who don't get scholars, right? They get really excited and then their just name isn't called out. So I think the first reason why is it provides purpose for the senior freshman year, right? So we've heard a lot about like college experience, and Ursula rightly said that it's like a bit of a buzzword without proper meaning, or it's often an ill-defined meaning, right? And I think in first year, like there's a really clear defined role for first year, right? You come into college, you're adjusting to college, like you learn a lot of life skills, and it isn't that academically stimulating, let's be honest. Like I don't know about every course, but like for me anyway, it was come in, here's a bit of basic economics and a bit of maths. Like you probably have done this last year, and have fun, go out and drink a bit. It was basically what I was told by my lecturers. And to be honest, that's kind of what happened, right? You learn life skills, even if those life skills are how to nurse a hangover the best way, right? And that's obviously an important part of first year. But what about second year, right? Second year is kind of neglected, right? Because it's not academically stimulating, really, right? I think it's come up a few times that you're still only doing the foundational basic stuff that you need to do better as you go forward into your postgraduate career. But you're not learning, you're not solving world problems, essentially. Like you're doing relatively basic things. Yeah, Jack, POI.
So I do agree, but all of the things that you outlined can be done by doing the things that all people on the proposition bench talk about, i.e. creating things to further academia in first and second year without the stress or the trade-off of people being stressed, losing friends, being disappointed. And it just means that overall, those very people you talk about are likely to be better.
Cool. So I think I actually might address that slightly later on, because I'm going to talk about continuous assessment and why that's awful and why Schols is better. And why replacing Schols with something else like that is worse for the people that Bev talked about. But I'll get to that in a little bit, right? So I was talking about that Schols offers that purpose in second year, especially for people who are quite academic, right? Because a lot of people use second year to set up things like podcasts. They set up, they become an officer in the Hist, maybe. I don't know. Or they do, yeah, don't do that maybe. That might not be the best use of your time, or maybe it is, who knows, ask me. Like Schols provides a purpose for people who are academic but don't have these other outside interests, right? Or maybe they do, but it provides an outlet for academic interests in second year in the same way that courses currently don't, and are unlikely to do so, right? It's a different kind of useful academics, right? Because you go from the Leaving Cert, which is entirely rote learning, like study clicks, less stress, more success, that was just really stressful, right? All these kind of things. And then you go to first year where it's like what I've talked about already, it's relatively an overview, it's not much. Second year, the same, right? But Schols is kind of your first chance to really get into a subject, right? Really get into a subject. And what I said before is that it is only for the nerds, right? It's for people who are really interested in their subject, right? Only a small minority of college do Schols. And that's because it is quite challenging, right? That's the inherent idea of it, right? It's unique because you're not trying to pass it, right? 40% is nothing. I think Ronan actually said this to me before I sat Schols. You probably don't remember, but I do. You said 70 or bust, and it's actually 100% true, because like if you get 69, it doesn't matter. You've lost, right? Essentially, you've lost. It rewards critical and individual thinking in a way that no other exam does up to second year, right? And it's quite specialized. You get really into the subject. Like I know more about ostracism and ancient Athens than anyone reasonably should, but it means that you get into your subject in a way that you haven't before, and in a way that actually does train you for postgraduate work. Because yeah, ostracism, Ellen, me and you both, that book in Usher for, oh God. Anyway, it gets you into postgraduate study, the mindset of focusing in on something really specific in a way that you won't do throughout your college career up until that point, and likely for some time after, right? And then on to my third point, which is somewhere in here. Yes, mental health and friends, right? So for those of you who watch Normal People with your parents, which is a really bad decision, right? I don't have Paul Mescal's anything, right? I don't have Marianne's Italian Villa or BDSM tendencies, right? See why you shouldn't watch your parents. But it did give me one good thing, which was sharing like what Schols is with them. Thank you for the minute left. Because it did a really good thing for mental health. As Bev talked about mental health earlier, and it's actually quite important in this. And I'm going to defer to her expertise here, because I'm not an expert on this in the same way that she is, but for me anyway, it really helps with imposter syndrome, right? Because seeing the very best people in my course, people who you go in, you see walking into the library and you're like, oh, I'm not as clever as them, but then sitting the same exams as them and doing similarly as well as them, or doing similarly to them, right? You realize that you can keep up with people around you, right? You realize that you aren't left behind in your course. Essentially, you get to keep up with your course, even if you don't get it. You realize that you are of a similar standard, or if you're close to their standard, right? You're not left behind. And also, finally, I'm just going to address the things in Jack's POI and the kind of idea about changing it, right? So if we just get rid of Schols entirely, right, what happens then? If all the academic like grading essentially falls back on final exams, or on your normal continuous assessment final exams, but that is awful. Sorry, I'm going to be another 30 seconds because I'm over time, and I'm always over time. But that's always awful, because continuous assessment realistically favors students who are rich, right? Because it favors students who can put in workloads. It favors students who can do all the readings, who can do all that. And that realistically gets you a good grade in first and second year if you just do the readings and turn up to lectures, right? In this way that you can't with Schols. With Schols, you actually have to have some critical thinking, where in first and second year, you have to just show up to your lectures, do the readings, and you'll get a first, right? Relatively speaking. And that's the same with any sort of replacement that you do in those years, because it's just going to be something that if you do the work, you'll get the grade, because you can't replace it with something in that early stage, except for Schols, because you need to only incentivize critical thinking. And the only way you do that is outside of CA environment, or outside of an environment where you can just go away and talk to the people before the exam, or during like the exam when it's 48-hour exam. And if that makes sense, that was a bit rushy. I'm over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the formal part of the debate. I will ask the correspondence secretary if we have any other speakers from the floor who want to make contributions. The auditor is shaking her head. That is a no. I will then move to the next part of the evening, where I will now put the question to the House on the motion that this House would abolish Schols. All those in favour, please vote aye, and all those against, please vote nay. So our poll is coming up.
Just while everyone's voting, I just thought I'd take the opportunity to plug some of our upcoming events of the Society. So next week's debate is very exciting. It's our honorary members debate. So if you enjoyed the wonderful vice presidents that spoke at this debate, maybe you enjoyed that debate where our like alumni of the Society basically come back. The motion is this House believes journalism is failing democracy, which is quite exciting. So that will be at the same time next week, and I invite everyone to come along to that. We also, if you want to get like try out chamber debating, but you're a bit nervous, we actually have chamber debate training debate training tomorrow at 2 p.m. So basically to help you get used to Zoom, to show you how to like properly do some rhetoric, proper oratory skills, very exciting. And on top of that, we have a debate this Friday in collaboration with Cumna Gael. It's on basically arts funding in the time of COVID. And it's an Irish language debate. So if you're really into Irish and you want to test your skills, I beg you to come along to that event. That's at Friday at 7 p.m. And very exciting times. And also next week we have 2 panel discussions happening. The first is a journalism panel, kind of as a taster for our chamber debate happening on Wednesday. That was happening on Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. And then on Friday, we have an arts and sports panel happening, which is also very exciting. Lots of things happening in the Society. I always feel out of breath when I am plugging our events because there's so much to remember. But yeah, how is the poll looking, Maggie?
So like just in case anyone, there's 2 people who haven't voted yet, but it looks pretty decisive. So I'll share the results.
Ooh.
Oh.
The motion has been defeated. So the College Historical Society in March 2021 has decided to preserve the old tradition. So congratulations to all the speakers on both sides and to everyone taking part. All that's left is for me as chair to say a few words. And sadly, we're not able to walk into college through the front gate, but if we'd obviously passed by those great statues of Burke on one side and Goldsmith on the other. Both of them did Scholl the exact same year. I think it's 1744. Burke got it and Goldsmith didn't. So maybe there's a lesson there that you can go for it, you might get it, you might not, but it still shouldn't hold you back, and you can still go on and achieve great things, and perhaps have your statue up somewhere in Trinity a number of years later. Dennis Caulfield Heron was the auditor of the Society in 1846. He's the reason why we have foundation and non-foundation scholarships, because he was a Catholic who succeeded in the exams in 1843, but as a Catholic wasn't eligible to become a scholar, and so that led to a big review, and in the 1850s it was changed then. So originally the non-foundation scholars were the Catholics, and he was a brilliant auditor who got into trouble taking on the Archbishop of Dublin, the Protestant Archbishop of Dublin, who didn't think students should be allowed debate, that it was corrupting for their souls, and that teaching them to speak from the floor and off the cuff and extempore speeches he thought was a destructive thing. And Heron at the young age was able to answer him brilliantly. Further reforms, like back when I started lecturing here in Trinity in the first decade of the century, there were 3 terms. There was a Michaelmas term 9 weeks, Hilary term 9 weeks, and a Trinity term of 4 weeks. And the Scholl exams actually took place after the Hilary term. So, and if you got a 2-1 or higher, you didn't have to sit the summer exams. So there was always a big bonus then for students. But then as the college academic year changed and the exams were moved much earlier to January, that was gone as well. In the history of the scholars, I think one crucial episode in the history must be the calendar in the year 2011 for Christmas to raise money for charity. It was a joint scholars and fellows calendar that was something that seemed to be popular, in vogue back around 2011. The idea of a nude calendar, a tastefully done nude calendar, which seemed to raise a bit of money. But I won't mention any names, but a hugely famous immunologist now who has really come to prominence during the pandemic. Well, perhaps came to prominence first in that it was all things, but then pictures on. Anyway, moving along. But I wonder if anyone could ever get a hand on that again. And then when I was senior lecturer, dean of undergraduates myself, then I was involved in a review of Scholl, and we did consider a lot of the issues that were discussed here. Whether it would be fair to have it just based on the second year exams. Quotas were discussed and rejected as not being fair. Like I admired the passion of Jack Williams tonight on the proposition side, and I thought that he raised some good points about how difficult it is if you're that student stuck on the 69 or 68.5. And one thing we did bring in was the idea of having a grade profile, that you had to have a majority of your papers being a first, and we tried to ensure that a court of examiners would review a case that was on the borderline. But I can see how problematic that would be. One of the things that struck me back then was just how passionate the scholars community of scholars and former scholars were about the institution, and how much it meant to them. I take Jack's point that it's not necessarily the best students, but the ones who have had the time to study and to put themselves forward. Although Robert Kennedy always believed that, and going back to ancient Athens, which was also mentioned, that there was a phrase about the Olympics that it was about putting yourself, that it wasn't necessarily the best who won the medals, but those who put themselves forward in the field. And that was always something the scholars themselves championed, this idea that it was about putting yourself forward. But I take the point that was made very strongly tonight, that sometimes you don't have the time to do that, and sometimes you don't have the confidence to do that. Like, I think probably the best student that I ever taught as an undergraduate didn't put herself forward for Scholl in second year because she didn't think she would get it, and that always struck me. Whereas again, I remember this was again 15 years ago, I remember one of my students in third year who was a scholar and never making my class at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and like halfway through the year, he just admitted that, you know, ever since he got the rooms on campus and was in Front Square, he actually just couldn't get out of bed in the afternoon and wasn't able to get to it. And I thought that was probably not a good sign as well about the impact of it. So I definitely have an open mind on some of these issues. And I think on the one hand, it would really be, you know, devastating for those who have ever been a scholar to have the institution change. But I do think perhaps that there are things that need to be looked at again, including the fact that was made very strongly tonight that students don't always know about it and don't always know what's involved, and that some get more encouragement than others, and maybe that there is an unfairness there, which isn't right. I know that there are elections going on that we're not allowed mention, and that's fascinating for reasons why I don't fully understand why things aren't allowed mention it. But anyway, if we're not allowed mention, we're not allowed mention. But as Ursula has mentioned, there is one election that you are allowed mention, the provost election, and without mentioning any names in that election, just to say that this is something that students have a vote in, and this only comes up once every 10 years. And it actually is an opportunity to press your case on these issues, like Scholl, you know, like accommodation, like you know, clubs and societies, whether, you know, you think you're overwhelmed or whatever is the issue. And it's a service that you're providing not just for yourselves and this generation of students, but also for the students over the term of that 10-year provostship. And like, you look back to that referendum in 2019 to defund the University Times, which I was delighted to say was defeated, but only 3,000 students voted in that. And that was a referendum that was being covered extensively in the national media. And yet you had, you know, close to 15,000 students who didn't vote in that. And I suspect that you might only have 2,000 students who will vote, maybe less, who will vote in the provost election, because you have to register and then you have to. So I actually think 1,000 students or less will determine where the student votes go in that election. And that's why I think it's so important for people to register, and because otherwise you'll be coming back next year giving out about the way college is being run, and students will be constantly giving out over the next 10 years. But then here's an opportunity to shape it. And if people don't do it, well, then that is evading your responsibility as well. So I think it's an opportunity to vote for the college that you want to see and the changes that you want to see, and to vote now or forever hold your peace. So I think it's an important responsibility, and one that I would urge you to exercise whatever way. And we have three very strong women candidates. The next provost is going to be a woman. I think that's a major breakthrough, but it's an opportunity to shape who that, you know, and the platform that you believe in. And I would definitely urge you, as well as whatever other elections are going on that we're not allowed to talk about, to also make sure your vote is counted in that. And that's how you affect the change that you want, whether it's about bringing in reforms to Scholl, getting rid of it, or bring in any of the other changes that you want to see. I think it's a huge power you have. And I think it could be so close this year. It could be that student vote. I know it's a small vote, but I think it actually could be the difference between the candidate winning and the candidate losing the election. And therefore you could decide the future direction of the university for the next 10 years. And that's quite something. So all I would say is my thanks to the auditor, my thanks to the correspondence secretary, who was so brilliant to deal with, and to the committee. And just to say, it's not ideal circumstances to be doing the debates like this, but it's a very important contribution you are making to keeping the spirits of the members up, to giving entertainment to so many, including us guests who come back to speak or to chair. And it's also ensuring that there's that unbroken line of debates and events. And it shows that, you know, things may go to pieces all around the world. We may be having to do these things from our homes, but that the Hist will go on, the show will go on. And I think that's a brilliant tribute to the auditor and to the committee. So I think just well done, everyone. So thank you.
Hear, hear.
Sorry, I pass over to the auditor now to do something. Sorry.
Yeah. Gotta do something now. But thank you so much, Patrick, so much for those very kind words. Honestly, I was almost tearing up at the beginning when you went off about everything that we're doing. And yeah, I'm immensely proud of this committee and what we're doing. But yeah, if you're interested in speaking at one of our chamber debates, you can sign up on our website or on our Facebook page. So it's at tcdhist.com/termcard, and we have all our signups for the rest of our term. Next week is our on-mems debate. The week after, we have a comedy debate in collaboration with FilmSock. I believe the film in subject is Twilight, which is very exciting. And then the week after is our ORNL debate, where we basically hand over the reins to our freshers. So if you're interested in any of those debates, reach out to us. We have like a ton of our correspondence secretary or our rec sec are running those debates, and it's very exciting. So yeah, honestly, I already plugged most of our events before during the polling. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful guests this evening, as well as our amazing student speakers. And just I really I'm amazed with all the passion and kind of the arguments that people brought to the table this evening. And thank you so much for speaking. Thanks to everyone who attended the debate. And also thank you for Maggie for organizing the debate and for everyone who was involved. So yeah, without further ado, I'll cede the floor back to the chair.
Thank you. And now I will call this house adjourned. So good night.